What's up, everyone? Jason Gilbo here at JGilbo11, taking a look at FanDuel and DraftKings NBA value plays for tonight's slate. 11 gamer, got some good games going on. A lot of the stars are going tonight, so obviously finding value is going to be important for fitting guys in like, Westbrook, like all the Warriors guys. So looking at Vegas tonight, blowout concern, obviously the only one really is the Warriors, minus 15.5 favorites. They do have the highest team total on the board tonight. Obviously, the Pacers were coming off a game last night. They did get Paul George back, which bodes well for their case, and a couple other players like CJ Miles. So we'll kind of see what to make of that game. Good GPP game to target, obviously, especially given the fact that Indiana really hasn't been that great offensively or defensively this season. So games in Brooklyn, Toronto, Houston, Chicago, and Philly all have totals over 210, are relatively close. Games in Dallas and Los Angeles sit below 200, but still some value in those ones. And overall, not too many injuries to really worry about. We'll kind of go along here and take a look at some, position by position. Deron Williams, interesting value tonight, 30 and 31 minutes in the last two games, given the ones that he's come back in. Obviously, he's been injured on and off this season. Decent matchup against Charlotte. He has 23 assists in those last two games. Obviously, the offense is going to flow through really him and Harrison Barnes at this point. Where they sit with Dirk out. Wes Matthews is going to pick up some minutes as well. So overall, I think Dallas is kind of, it's funneled down to about three pieces that you can look at for value. So despite the team total being relatively low, I think you can fire away with a couple value pieces. Deron Williams still relatively cheap just because his price, or just because, the injury hasn't really helped him get kind of a stable fantasy production. Sergio Rodriguez is another one. If Jared Bayless is out, this is a guy who's missed a couple of games in a row, has missed most of the season. You look at Rodriguez, obviously good, 25 to 30 fantasy point range, 7 or more assists in each of the last 4 games. And Rodriguez continues to still be very cheap. So you look at this matchup against Denver, obviously very solid. These two teams are not very, defensive juggernauts at all. There's a lot of value to be had in this game, and Rodriguez, if Bayless is out, would certainly be another one. Memphis, Andrew Harrison, Troy Daniels, interesting kind of guard options here tonight. Harrison, steady minutes with Conley out. Not the most productive, in his last outing, but, still puts up a respectable score. This is a guy who does have 30 fantasy point upside, can be a nice bargain bin player. Troy Daniels, obviously, is a guy who's been rolling red hot in terms of shooting from the field and needs to continue that stretch. Definitely going to draw a lot more ownership and notice after, last outing. So, but this guy, if he gets hot from the field, we're looking at 25, 30 fantasy point upside and even higher. Do I think we'll see a reproduction of what we saw last game? Probably not. But Daniels is a steady kind of shooting guard option, especially given the fact that his price is still very cheap. If you're looking to punt, a shooting guard spot, I definitely don't mind doing it with Daniels. If Tony Parker's out, Patty Mills a viable option. We know we've been down that road before. On this slate, it's an okay matchup against Milwaukee. Not particularly thrilled about using him, but he's cheap. So if you can't quite afford one of these other guys, I guess you can call him as an option. But for the most part, I'm going to be likely avoiding. Wes Matthews moving over to shooting guard spot. I like him tonight. Big minutes, scoring more of late, averaging 19 over the last 6 games. Real points, not fantasy points. In a matchup against Charlotte. You look at that game, Charlotte's been up and down defensively this season. So, Dallas offensively. But, I like their core pieces. I think there's enough value there to kind of make out a roster tonight because, we look at some of these other guys. We'll get to, Jay Crowder and Ryan Anderson, JaMychal Green. There's been a lot of guys that you can say are kind of like Wes Matthews where they haven't been particularly great all year round, but, they've had their stretches of time, and that's kind of what Wes Matthews is in right now. So I think you can look at him as a fairly stable shooting guard option tonight if you want to pay up a little extra. But Will Barton's really the guy that I'm looking at. 33 and 34 minutes since returning from injury, both 30-plus fantasy point games. Philadelphia 24th against shooting guards and defensive efficiency. So Barton, obviously a good stretch tonight to be in a lot of my lineups, especially given the fact that, the injury has kind of knocked down his price. That really hasn't jumped up. This is usually a guy that we see, floating around the 6K range. So Barton's a really solid option tonight. Cash games and GPPs, you can trust him. And he's also got that upside, especially for that price. Small forward, Jay Crowder, been pretty meh the last 2 games. I mean, overall, you expect a lot better out of him in such a good matchup. Um, Tonight, looking at Houston, the minutes have been there for Crowder, which is nice. There's no restriction anymore. Houston allowing the 8th most fantasy points to small forwards. Very high total. I'm going to be looking to get a lot of exposure to this game on both sides, and Jake Crowder is certainly one of them. I'm expecting a better performance out of him. This is a guy who should kind of hover around the 30, to 35 fantasy point range tonight. Outside of that, though, I mean, small forward's pretty bland in terms of value. The good thing is on DraftKings, you can use Will Barton there. I think Troy Daniels is eligible there as well. Troy Williams, has been getting minutes there. Hasn't been particularly productive on the fantasy points per minute. Just kind of a punt option. Not really a guy that I'm looking to use. He's been a poor shooter, not heavily involved. So the only real good thing is, I mean, he's generated a couple of defensive stats, but hasn't been particularly solid for the most part. So while he's cheap, while he's getting minutes, not a guy that I'm really excited to roster. So not my favorite value tonight. Power forward, you actually got a couple good guys you can spot up against here. Ryan Anderson, back-to-back 30-point games. Boston struggles against power forwards. 5th most fantasy points allowed, 27th in efficiency, 29th in rebounding. This sets up for a good Ryan Anderson night, especially, just in this matchup alone, but also the high total. These are 2 top 10 offensive efficiency teams, so I'm expecting a good amount of points. JaMychal Green, a guy who's been averaging 11 and 7 over the last 7 games, 31 minutes per game with Zach Randolph out. Randolph has been ruled out tonight, so you look at this one. I mean, while Anthony Davis is there, you're really looking at the Pelicans, who are, allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to power forwards. Went 21 and 6 for them against them earlier this season. So Green in a solid spot to kind of really continue his trend where he's been playing particularly well. Outside of that, though, I mean, Dwight Powell, this is more of a play if you're just kind of punting a couple of positions to fit in guys like Westbrook. This is more of a DraftKings play, given the fact that he's 3,900. Charlotte, 23rd in rebounding, 23rd in defensive efficiency, middle of the road in fantasy points allowed towards power forwards. More of a play, really. I mean, like I said, if you're rostering guys that, Westbrook and those types where you need to punt a couple positions. 28 and 24 minutes over the last 2. He is foul prone. Does have double-double potential. There is that to him. He kind of, draws the line of guys like, Patty Mills, Troy Williams, where they're cheap, but, this is more of just a roster construction move where if you're building multiple lineups and you're looking to kind of get different things going on and maybe roster 2 big guys or, not quite go as balanced, those are kind of the guys to do it. Looking at center, John Henson, I mean, averaging 15 and 7 with 3 blocks per game over the last 4, 25 minutes per game, still 4,700 on DraftKings. That's where I'd really look to use him because I'll get to a guy in a minute where I can't really see using anyone else other than, this name at center on FanDuel. So John Henson, the matchup against the Spurs isn't particularly scaring me. Rather low total there, rather low spread there, just 5 points, decent total to target. Spurs have been okay against big men. Obviously, Pau Gasol down there. LaMarcus Aldridge haven't really been the dominant defensive guys. Gasol's never really been, so not a guy to really worry about him. So Henson's certainly in play for me tonight. Cody Zeller averaging 25 points, fantasy points per game over the last 6. Dallas 26th in the rebounding, 20th in defensive efficiency. He's another cheap DK center, 4,400 you can look at. So obviously, good pairing partners with other centers and kind of cheap way to get double-double exposure. But on FanDuel, I mean, there's really no need to go any cheaper for me. Joel Embiid, top 8 in fantasy points per minute. 6,400 is just still way too cheap. Minute restriction is up to 28 now. Had the day off already against the Celtics, had 2 days off, didn't play yesterday, averaging 19, 10, and 3 over the last 3 games, 18 and 7 on the season. I mean, this guy's just been a beast. I don't see any way around it. I mean, a good matchup against Denver, 2 of the poor defensive teams, so you can really fire away with Embiid there on FanDuel in all formats, and obviously DK 6,900, he's certainly in play as well. Moving on to some mid-range picks, I'll talk about a couple of guys that I like if you're going with a balanced approach. That I like in tournaments, I like for GPP upside, to kind of skip out. And I think balanced approach is kind of getting a little bit more contrarian, especially given the fact that, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, those Anthony Davis, those guys are all, super expensive. So, going contrarian and kind of going for that 30 to 40 point consistency around all those other guys and maybe just paying up for one of them or not paying up for any of them. It's been a little bit contrarian these days. So mid-range picks with some upside, like Jeff Teague tonight. You look at the Warriors. I mean, obviously, a good defensive team still, but I like Teague even with Paul George back. I think there is some upside there. Relatively cheap price still. Dennis Schroeder's another one going up against Russell Westbrook, and OKC hasn't been particularly good at defending guards this season. So Dennis Schroeder's an intriguing one, especially if you're banking on that one to stay close. He's going to have to be a primary scorer, especially if Millsap sits. I mean, his usage takes a big jump. So the Schroeder is certainly in play around that 6K range. Sean Kilpatrick, Avery Bradley, those are two shooting guards in the mid-range that I'm looking at. Obviously 30-plus fantasy point upside. Avery Bradley's been a rebounding machine of late. Obviously, we know Kilpatrick, the way he's been scoring. Those are two guys that you can look at for solid, I think cash games as well. But you also can look at them in GPPs just because they're pricing upside and just kind of stick in the mid-range at shooting guard even and not necessarily punt. So moving to a small forward, a couple guys I really like. Gordon Hayward has definitely ticked up in price, but 7,900 on both sides. When you compare him to a Durant or to a LeBron James or to even a Paul George, he's cheaper. And you look, it's a great matchup against the Lakers, bottom 5 defensively against small forwards. You look at Hayward, 30-plus real points in each of the last 3 games. He's been very productive, and the usage goes up, obviously, with no Derek Favors. George Hill looking iffy for tonight's game. I like him as a guy who can be a high-ceiling, small forward. We don't tend to really look at him like that. He's always just kind of a cash game guy for me and providing a solid floor. But Hayward's definitely got that upside tonight, as is Harrison Barnes. Still no Dirk, going to carry the load of power forward. So certainly looking at him. Outside of that, though, Otto Porter is an intriguing one against Brooklyn. Cheaper than the other two there. So if you're looking to kind of roll him out, I like some of these Washington cheaper guys against Brooklyn, who's been able to keep games competitive. So I'm not really worried about a blowout game. I think there's a lot of value on really both sides of Washington and Brooklyn. Hard to talk about center just given the fact that Embiid's 6,400, but Rudy Gobert, Clint Capella are two guys in good spots against bad rebounding teams. Gobert's been a guy who's took on a little bit of offensive usage. Obviously, we know the block upside. Capella's the same way. Both double threats on tonight's slate. So if you're looking to pivot off of Embiid, which on FanDuel I don't know why you wouldn't be, or if you're looking to pair one up with DK, those are two guys in that mid range that I like quite a bit. So that's gonna wrap things up here with DFC finding value. If you want to head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com, got our cheat sheets coming up and some other great content, and be sure to catch the rest of our content. So I'll see you guys on Wednesday.